For a while, I've been convicted about our churches. I love the church. It doesn't mean she's not difficult at times. It doesn't mean at times it's not frustrating to be a part of her, but it's the bride of Christ. And so I'm very careful in making sure that when I speak of the church, that I speak of her with the dignity that I would want somebody to speak of my bride. But there are times when we need to be honest in the church about the church. And here's one of the things that I've been struggling with the church for quite some time. We are really good at making converts, but I believe we struggle deeply with making disciples, because there is a difference. Converts, it is the group of people that come to Jesus. They hear an evangelistic sermon, or they meet a friend, or are invited to church, or a minister or a group of elders comes to their home, and they lead them through the steps of asking for the forgiveness of their sins and asking for God to rescue them from their brokenness. They give in to the waters of baptism, and they come out in new life, resurrected in Jesus Christ. The problem is a lot of us think that that's where the journey ends. That the victory has been won, that since the angels in heaven are celebrating, it's now time to move on to the next convert. Now hear me very clearly. There are some people who have the spiritual gift of evangelism, and they are unbelievable about every single person in every single interaction, maximizing it for the kingdom, maximizing it by bringing the healing power of Jesus to the broken world around them. I not only know them, but they are deeply close to me, and I celebrate their gift. However, if the church doesn't get better at making disciples, we cannot get frustrated if the church struggles with being shallow. It's not fair. It's not fair because all of our church services and all of our church budgets are pointing towards getting people into Jesus, and I find that noble, worthy, holy, and full of the gospel. But this week I've been reflecting on the end of Matthew's gospel. Matthew chapter 28. Verses 18 through 20, it's that part where Jesus is about to ascend to heaven. And he looks at his disciples and he says, "Then Jesus came to them and said," verse 18, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. I am the King. Therefore, go and make disciples. Therefore, go and make disciples." It doesn't say converts. And here's the thing that's interesting. You cannot make a disciple if people aren't converted. You have to have converts in order to make disciples. But what I think we've forgotten in the church is you can make converts and never actually make a disciple. Jesus lays out this pattern in the words that follow. "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit," conversion, "and converting them and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." Teaching them how to live as Christ followers. Teaching them how to live as Christians. Teaching them how to be disciples. How to walk in the footsteps of the rabbi. How to sing the melodies of the heart of our King. Of how to walk up the Via Dolorosa carrying our cross as Jesus did. We were not called just to make converts. We were called to make disciples. And you see this pattern not just in the New Testament, but you see it in the Old Testament with Elijah. In 1 Kings chapter 19, calling Elisha and discipling Elisha in the ministry of being a prophet and handing him over his mantle as the Lord takes him to the world, knowing that the prophet Elijah will be the disciple of Elijah that God needs. You see this with Moses and Joshua. You see this in the New Testament with Paul and with Timothy, and you see it with Jesus and 12 men. Some of you may be thinking like, you know what, Shane, I agree with you. We need to make sure we're making disciples, but I don't know how. I don't know what to do. I get overwhelmed and think about, I don't know how to teach, and I don't know how to speak, and Here's the beautiful thing. Making disciples is as simple as inviting a group of people to watch you live. Inviting them in your home. Inviting them over at meals. Inviting them over for periods of time to watch you interact with your children, or to watch you interact with your wife or with your husband, to watch you interact with your parents. It's inviting them over and watching how a Christian disciple fights with their spouse or deals with a rebellious child. It's inviting people close enough to watch how a Christ follower lives. It's not complicated, but it is vulnerable. It is difficult, because what we have to do is expose our walk with Christ to another person, saying, as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11, imitate me as I imitate Christ. That's discipleship. My wife and I have had the privilege over the years of having dozens and dozens and dozens of college students in our home. Some of them are just over for a meal to get to be in our space, but some of them we have walked with for 2, 3, 4 years at a time, where every week they would be in our home. And we would sit down, and part of discipleship is telling our stories, all the mess-ups and all the successes, and hearing their stories. Asking them the simple question of what's going on in your world. Asking them the simple question of what can I do to help. Discipleship is not complicated, it's just vulnerable. But one of the reasons why discipleship, I think, gets so overlooked in the church is that it's not measurable. You can't fit discipleship on a budget. It's different than converts. Converts, you can measure how many people were baptized, or measure how many people prayed the prayer. But with discipleship, it's about transformation, which takes a long time, tons of effort, and ultimately, a lot of vulnerability. My challenge for you this week is this. Pray that the Lord will prepare your heart to disciple another, to walk in His footsteps, to obey His final words in the Gospel of Matthew, to obey the Great Commission of not just converting the world, but discipling those that have been converted. I love you guys. Have a good rest of the week.